This is section 3.3, solving multi-step equations. There are several tools that are available to you to solve multi-step equations. You can combine like terms, you can solve using the distributive property, you can multiply using the reciprocal, or you could do all of the above. So let's take a look at the first example, which features combining like terms. We have 8x minus 3x minus 10 equals 20. We're going to combine the variable terms, the x terms on the left-hand side. They become 5x minus 10 equals 20. We're going to add 10 to both sides to isolate the x on one side by itself. That becomes 5x equals 30. And then we're going to divide by 5 to solve for x, so x equals 6. In the second example, we have negative 6x plus 4x minus 18 equals 22. Again, combine your like terms so that you have negative 2x minus 18 equals 22. Add 18 to both sides to isolate the x term so that you get negative 2x equals 40. And then finally, divide by negative 2 so that you calculate that x equals negative 20. The second tool that you can use is solving using the distributive property. Now, whenever the distributive property is involved, you really need to do that first. So in the first problem, we have 7x plus 2 times the quantity x plus 6 equals 39. So use the distributive property first to see what all your terms are. We're going to have 7x plus 2x plus 12 equals 39. Then we come to the step we saw in the previous slide. Now we're going to combine our like terms. So 7x plus 2x is 9x, plus 12 equals 39. We're going to subtract 12 from both sides to isolate the 9x term. And then we're going to divide by 9 to solve for x, which is x equals 3. The next tool is multiplying by the reciprocal. Whenever you have a fraction involved in the distributive property, you have to multiply by the reciprocal to get rid of the fraction. Okay, so you really don't have to do the distributive property, because once you multiply any fraction by its multiplicative inverse, it's going to remove the fraction entirely. You'll see what I mean here. If we have 3 halves times the quantity 3x plus 5 equals negative 24, if you multiply both sides by 2/3, that 3 halves is going to disappear. So the left-hand side of the equation becomes 3x plus 5, and that equals negative 24 times 2/3. Remember, whatever you did on the left-hand side of the equation, you also have to do on the right. When you simplify this, when you multiply it, you get 3x plus 5 equals negative 16. We want to isolate the x term, so subtract 5 from both sides. So you get 3x equals negative 21. And then when you divide by 3 to solve for x, you get x equals negative 7. This is a word problem from page 150 on bird migration, and this is the problem. A flock of cranes migrates from Canada to Texas. The cranes take 14 days, which is 336 hours, to travel 2,500 miles. The cranes fly at an average speed of 25 miles per hour. How many hours of the migration are the cranes not flying? It was key here to translate those 14 days into hours, because you see our rate is 25 miles per hour. Remember, the rate always has to agree with the time. And from our first chapter, we know that distance equals rate times time. Let's set up our variables. If we let x be the amount of time the cranes are not flying, because remember, that's what we want to solve for, the time they're not flying, then the time they are flying is 336 minus x, the total time minus the time they're not flying. Okay? So then we're going to use our old equation, distance equals rate times time, to set the distance equal to the rate times time. So they gave us the distance is 2,500, and that's going to equal the rate, 25 miles per hour, times the time they're flying, which is 336 minus x. To solve this, you need to use the distributive property. So we're going to take 2,500 and set it equal to 25 times 336, which is 8,400, minus 25 times x. To solve, you need to subtract 8,400 from each side. Remember, we have to isolate the variable term. So we get negative 5,900 equals negative 25x. If you divide both sides by negative 25, you get 236. X equals 236, which is the number of hours the birds are not flying. That's really key. And that's why it's important in word problems to always define your variables at the beginning. Even if you think you're going to remember what a variable stands for, you may not. So please write that down in the problem. I'm always looking for that so I understand what you're doing with your work. All right, so make sure you identify that. Write down that 336 minus x is the amount they're flying, and x is the time they're not flying. So when you get to the bottom of the problem and you see what x equals, you understand what that means.